Hello. So this is a new channel I'm doing, and this is a really bad intro because I have no YouTube experience whatsoever, and I have no intro experience whatsoever. So we're just going to kind of hop right into things today. So I am going to be talking about the RDNA2 cards coming out from AMD. I've been an AMD user for the past 7 months, 8 months. I have my own rig with a 5700 Sapphire Edition 5700 XT. So this is kind of the big Navi rumors in the RDNA2. Has been something I've always been interested in, and I feel like it's finally time I start a tech channel and see where it goes. I've always been interested in tech, and this is something I've always wanted to kind of see what would happen if I did this. So this is kind of a pilot video to see if I should really pursue this and make more content for you guys. So just let me know down in the comments what you think of this, what do you think of the channel, things I can improve upon because I'm sure there's a lot of those, and I'm just going to get right into it. Okay, so before we talk about RDNA2, I want to review the current graphics lineup from AMD, and this would be the RDNA architecture Gen 1. So to start off, I want to talk about the 5700 and XT and the 5700 XT Anniversary Edition. These cards both feature 40 compute units, 2,560 stream processors, 8 gigabytes of GDR6 memory, and a memory speed of 448 megabytes per second on a 256-bit bus. Now, the main difference between these two cards is the clock speeds, and that would be the 5700 XT coming in at 1600 megahertz base and a 1900 megahertz boost, and the 5700 XT Anniversary coming at about 1700 megahertz base and almost a 2000 megahertz boost. So really what we're looking at with these cards, and I want to point out, is the naming scheme here. The 5700 XT, the XT translates to NVIDIA Super, the higher performing die of that card. The Anniversary, or the flagship 5700 model, is the Anniversary Edition in this case, but this is very much equivalent, in my opinion, to NVIDIA's Ti or Ti. So I believe we will be seeing one of these variants in the upcoming RDNA2 architecture, which has been dubbed primarily as Big Navi. Now, looking at the 5700 graphics, we have 36 compute units, a 1400 megahertz base clock, and an 1800 megahertz boost clock, and it's coming in at around 7.95 or 8 teraflops. And this card is really a cut down 5700 XT. So when we're looking at this, essentially what I think they would have done here is disabled 4 of the compute units on that card, which would leave us with the same amount of memory, same memory speed, and same memory bus. And with the loss of compute units and such, they could have adjusted those clocks along with that. Also, when you're disabling the compute units and such, we're going to probably assume it's going to be trying to hit some lower benchmarks there and lower resolutions than a 5700 XT, so the clock wouldn't need to be as high as a 5700 XT there. Moving on to the 5600 lineup, we have the 5600 graphics and the 5600 XT. Now, the 5600 is, again, your base kind of general graphics, which features 32 compute units, a 1400 megahertz base, and a 1560 megahertz game clock. And it comes in at about 6.39 teraflops of performance power, and features 6 gigabytes of GDR6 memory at 336 megabytes per second. And then the larger 5600 XT comes in at 36 compute units with a 7.19 teraflop performance. Now, one thing I want to point out with this card is it comes in with the 6 gigabytes of GDR6 memory, while the variant below it, the 5500 XT, includes 8 gigabytes of GDR6 memory. And that is going to bring me to the 5500 XT, which comes in at 22 compute units and 5.2 teraflops of performance with 8 gigabytes of GDR6 memory. And this is kind of the lower end Navi card. As of my knowledge, I don't think they've released a 5300 model, but I could be wrong there. So that may be the lower end, and I believe that would have, I think it's around 16 CUs, I want to say, 16 compute units. But we're going to stick with the three, which would model the NVIDIA 2060, 2070, and 2080. Of course, these cards cannot compare to those, the 2080 and sometimes a 2070, but I think that the GPU makers going forward with the NVIDIA 3000 series and the AMD RDNA2, I believe that they will have three tiers, just like how Intel and AMD mimic their CPU lineup, where they have Ryzen 3 and i3, i5, Ryzen 5, i7, Ryzen 7, and i9, Ryzen 9. So I think there's going to be three tiers of GPUs from both sides. Now, before we look at what I'm thinking the lineup for RDNA2 will look like, I want to go over some things we definitely know about RDNA2. It has been confirmed, at least to my knowledge, that there is an 80 compute unit max on all dies. There will be ray tracing, hardware accelerated ray tracing across the whole lineup. There is a 4K target with the RDNA2 architecture, and there will be no more 4 gigabyte memory in any variants of an RDNA2 card. So 4 gigabytes you will not see coming with any cards, so I am assuming that the lowest amount of memory shipped will be 6 gigabytes of GDR6 memory. Another thing we know, but we don't really understand what this exactly means, and I've speculated a couple things, is Lisa Su often mentions Navi 2x and not RDNA2. 2x could refer to 2 times, and this is going to kind of be the driver for my whole theory in the upcoming lineup I'm going to show you here in a few seconds, that RDNA2 is going to be 2 times the performance of RDNA1, or RDNA, and it's going to have 2 times the graphical horsepower, some cases CUs, and in some cases memory. So I think that 2x, that 2 times there, is going to be really important when determining the upcoming lineup. Now, with RDNA2, I have a couple things that I think AMD needs to hit to compete with NVIDIA. I think that they need to have a card that is capable of 4K 60 frames per second gaming. I think they need to have an 8 gigabytes minimum of GDR6 VRAM. I think the lowest end of their cards needs to be 1080p 75 frames per second gaming. And I think they need to keep the power draw under 300 watts, which could be difficult with some of the variants I'm going to present here. But I think that a lot of users do not want to upgrade their PSUs, and they want to keep their current system and just upgrade their card. And I think that that will be an advantage AMD will have over NVIDIA, because from what I've seen, Ampere is going to be very power hungry. So getting right into it, we're going to talk about the RDNA2 lineup that I foresee coming out this September. So with that information, let's talk about RDNA2 6000 series graphics. I want to start with the 6700 lineup. This will feature 3 variants, much like the 5700 lineup in today's current architecture. We will have the 6700, 6700 XT, and 6700 flagship. To introduce this, I want to talk about the 6700 XT. I think this card will come in at an 80 compute unit die with 1900 MHz base clock, 2100 MHz boost clock, 21.5 teraflops of graphical horsepower, 5120 stream processors, 12 gigabytes of GDR6 memory, clocked at 672 megabytes per second on a 384-bit bus. The reason I'm thinking 80 compute units is because I think that in order to compete with NVIDIA and also beat NVIDIA, AMD will need to utilize the full potential of the RDNA2 die. I also feel that the average clock speed needs to be around 2000 megahertz, which will bring the card at over 20 teraflops of performance. And I feel that's a major milestone, as I believe that NVIDIA will certainly try to reach over 20 teraflops in performance, and I also think it's going to be very important in 4K applications. Mind you, these cards may be so powerful that we might hear of potentially some applications being able to run in 8K on these cards, which would be phenomenal. I want to talk next about the 6700. This is going to resemble today's 5700 graphics card. In today's lineup, the 5700 has 4 less compute units, or 4 disabled compute units, on its die. And I feel that this is going to be mimicked in this RDNA2 lineup. So I came in with a 76 compute unit card with slightly lower clocks at 1850 megahertz base and 2000 megahertz boost, 19.46 teraflops of performance, 4,864 stream processors, the same 12 gigabytes of GDR6 memory. I do feel that the memory will be the same between at least the 6700 XT and 6700 as it is today with the 5700 XT and the 5700. Now, moving on to Big Navi. I don't think that there will be a 6700 XT Big Navi. I think the Big Navi will be the 6700 XT flagship. And this can be a variety of names. I don't think it will be Anniversary Edition, because I think that we are past the anniversary now. But I feel that it will be something different than the rest of the lineup. I don't think they would just name it the 5700 XT flagship or something like that. And the card naming scheme, I want to talk briefly about that here. The 6700 is equivalent to a 3080, the basic lower end of the die. The XT is equivalent to the NVIDIA Super. So whenever you see an XT, it's going to be competing with the NVIDIA Super version. And then the flagship is for the TI. And as I know, right now, NVIDIA only makes one TI or TI model, the 2080 Ti or TI currently, and the 3080 Ti, which will be coming out in September, supposedly. And I feel that AMD's Big Navi will be competing directly with that. So they may have a different naming scheme for that there. I still think it will retain the 80 compute units from the 6700 XT does, as with the 5700 XT and the 5700 XT Anniversary Edition today. However, much like those cards, I feel like there's going to be higher clocks with a 50 megahertz increase on the base clock and 100 megahertz base on the boost clock. I also feel that with these specs, the card will reach 22.53 teraflops of graphical horsepower. It will retain the same amount of stream processors as it retains the same amount of compute units. And I feel that the memory will be either two ways. Currently, the 5700 XT and 5700 XT Anniversary Edition have the same amount of memory, GDR6 8GB. However, to beat NVIDIA, which the NVIDIA card will have at least 12 gigabytes of GDR6 memory on the 3080 Ti, I feel that AMD really needs to go all in with 16 gigabytes of GDR6 memory. And I feel that the clock speed on this memory will be 896 megabytes per second, which will be on a 512-bit bus. Now, there may be a possibility this card goes straight to the top and attempts to attack the NVIDIA Titan. Very slim chance this happens, but if so, I foresee a 24 gigabyte variant with 1,344 megabytes per second speed. And like I said, it's extremely far-fetched, but there is a possibility we may see something like that out there. Moving down the line, I want to talk about the 6600 lineup. Now, this is going to be a bit different than the current generation, as I don't think that the 6600 XT will have the same amount of compute units as the 6700 XT. I feel it will be 4 compute units less than that. And just because I think that there's going to be too many compute units on the top end, and I think that it just seems unrealistic to me. So what I'm looking at for the lineup here is the 6600 XT to come in at 72 compute units with a 1650 megahertz base clock, a 1900 megahertz boost clock, a 17.51 teraflop performance, 4,608 stream processors, 8 gigabytes of GDR6 memory at 448 megabytes per second on a 256-bit bus. This memory is identical to that of the current 5700 XT, just a note in there. Now, I feel that it obviously will not reach 20 teraflops of performance, and I don't really think that AMD is going to go from 20 teraflops to something more like 12, 10 teraflops in their lineup. I just don't see that possible. So I think we're going to see these cards in about the 15 to 18 teraflop range for the 6600 series. And the smaller die, it'll be the 6600, and it will have 68 compute units, so 4 less than the 6600 XT. It will have a slightly higher base clock and slightly higher boost clock because of those disabled compute units. You can allocate power to slightly higher clock speeds. But the overall performance will be about a half a teraflop less at 17 teraflops. It will have 4,352 stream processors and will retain the exact same memory as the 6600 XT, much like the current 5600 and 5600 XT. And I feel that there will be a 6600 mainstream card, unlike today where I have not seen one sold, even though 6600 graphics are listed on AMD's website. And I do not believe those are mobile chips. And the reason why I think this is possible is because AMD is going to try to directly compete with NVIDIA. They've beat Intel, and now it's time to move on to NVIDIA. They're going to match their lineup just like they did with Intel. And having a card the equivalence of a Super wouldn't be able to match up with the regular version of that card. And I think they're really trying to pair their cards up as exactly as they can with NVIDIA. So that's why I feel there's going to be a 6600 mainstream variant in the RDNA2 series. And then the final card I want to talk about is the 6500 XT. I believe this card will be the same amount of compute units as the Xbox Series X. And the reason why is because the current 5500 series graphics have significantly less compute units than the 5600 XT. So I feel that 54 compute units, or potentially even 58 compute units, is a more appropriate number for this. I don't see any cards having 40 compute units or less in this generation because, like I said earlier, there's no way AMD is going to go from 80 compute units down to 36. That's giving you approximately a 44 compute unit range. And currently there's about an 18 compute unit range on their lineup. So I just think that's just too far spread out. I also feel the clock will be higher because of this, significantly less amount of compute units at 1600 megahertz and 1950 megahertz on the boost. And then I believe that there will be 13.48 or 13.5 teraflops of graphical horsepower with this card. There will also be 3,456 stream processors, and here's where I think the 6 gigabytes of GDR6 memory we find in the 5600 XT will go. Obviously, they're not going to use 4 gigabytes of memory, and to be honest, I don't think they'll use 8. If they use 8 gigabytes of memory on this card, then I speculate there will be 10 gigabytes of GDR6 on the 6600 and 6600 XT. But looking at NVIDIA's, the leaked rumors, and the potential lineup for NVIDIA's 3000 series, I feel 6 gigabytes is much more appropriate. And that will come in with 336 megabytes per second on a 192-bit bus. Now, some theories I have about AMD versus NVIDIA. Here's how I think the launch will play out. I think AMD is going to create cards that are roughly $50 to $200 cheaper than the lineup equivalent as NVIDIA. So if NVIDIA will release a 3080 Ti at $1,200, AMD will release their flagship 6700 XT at $1,000. If AMD would release a 2070 Super, AMD would release, or a 3070 Super, my bad, AMD would release a 6600 XT for around $100 less. And so I really feel they're going to kind of play the more affordable um, for the consumer, but I think they're also going to have a little bit less performance than NVIDIA. And the reason why is NVIDIA is so well established in graphics, and they've already been using ray tracing for a previous generation, that I feel that AMD just can't catch up that much in a single generation. So I feel they'll be a little behind, much like they are with Intel, where you'll get that 5 extra FPS. But at the end of the day, the average consumer will be considering AMD over NVIDIA due to the cost performance. And most people, you really aren't going to notice the extra few frames per second. I also feel that the gaming cards, this series, will be better equipped for workstation applications than NVIDIA. And this is a pretty bold claim, as most applications recommend NVIDIA cards these days. And I think that's really just because of the ray tracing. So I feel once AMD releases this lineup with hardware accelerated ray tracing, I feel that you will see more recommendations for AMD cards, as we've seen with Ryzen, which performs very well in the workstation tasks versus Intel. So I feel the situation will be pretty much the same on both the CPU side and the GPU side of AMD. I also feel that Big Navi is not going to be the biggest Navi. Um, I think there's also a possibility Sapphire always makes GPUs with a little bit higher clocks than what AMD has to offer, and I feel that there will be a Sapphire variant that will potentially have 23 teraflops of performance. And I don't know anything about memory. The memory may be different, memory may be the same. But as for performance, I feel that Sapphire has always come through in the past like that. I feel that there will be a slightly more powerful version than the flagship GPU. And if not, it may have higher clocks and the same amount of CUs, but it won't have as much memory as the flagship GPU. And then some other things to note: the cards will be labeled probably as RX RT for the ray tracing, so Radeon ray tracing essentially. Um, and like I said, I feel that there will be a 6 gigabyte standard for memory and a max of 16 gigabytes on the largest card. 24 still is kind of floating out there. I don't think anything's going to go above $1,000 in this lineup unless they would release a 24 gigabyte card. But like I said, that's probably the most far-fetched thing I'm going to probably tell you anytime soon related to these GPUs. And I really just think from here, AMD has a long ways to go still. RDNA3 is an advanced node, so it's not 5 nanometers as far as I know. It'll be interesting to see what they achieve with that, and I'd be personally interested to see if they're able to achieve a card that is equivalent to the Radeon Pro Duo in that range. If you don't know what that card is, it's a custom card that AMD made for the Apple Mac Pro a year back, and it's a behemoth card, extremely large, extremely powerful GPU, and I like to see if they'd pull something like that out in their Pro lineup more often with the upcoming series. So really, that's about all I have for you today. Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think of some of the numbers I presented here? What do you think of some of the slides I have here? What do you think of the format of my videos? Obviously, I'm not the best at this. This is the first time I've done something like this. I'm running off simple notes and bullet points. I don't have a script. And I'm just kind of trying this out. So any advice and all advice is very helpful. And if you have any comments about the cards and what you think will happen, or anything you'd like to share with me and see in a future video, please let me know, and I'd be more than happy to talk about it. Thank you for watching.